This is the cold steel heavy machete. When I first got it, like most cold steel machetes, it comes with what can barely be called an edge, huge burr, not sharp. Makes it basically almost impossible to use for anything outside of a blunt impact. Feels horrible, shock and vibration is excessive, bounces out of wood, no edge retention to speak of. Even when considering the very low initial sharpness, that collapses immediately, down to nothing. Reground it, cleaned all the burr off the edge, kept the same angle. Cutting performance still very low because it comes with a very thick initial profile. Better than original in terms of it could be used, but unless you're just cutting very light brush, not nice. Reground it significantly. Essentially put on a primary grind. The blade stock is very thin, so even a very low angle will only produce a very shallow bevel because there's not much stock here to actually grind off. Reground the edge, thinned it out. Now it performs much better. For chopping heavier woods, essentially if you can cut it with say a few cuts, few chops, this is very nice to have. Lots of power because it has the width to give it good weight even with the very thin stock. Nice length. So for example on wood, say the size of a 1x3, 1x4 or something 2 to 3 inches for medium woods, up to around say 3 inches or so for soft woods, and this blade performs relatively well. Like I said, if you're cutting through something that you can do in a few chops, with the regrind this is very nice. However, anything thicker, like something the size of a 2x4, if it's moderately hard, not fun to use. This blade stock is so thin, it has no wedging, no chip release ability, so the blade binds very heavily. Trying to cut the composite materials, the laminates like OSB and plywood, is just an exercise in frustration because again, the blade will bind very heavily. And trying to use it on any kind of thicker, harder woods, again it just sticks. It's very difficult to remove. Not functional for that. However, for light grasses, light vegetation, this nice sweep and the curve is very nice. Grasses will slide up along this and it will keep cutting them even at a lower sharpness than a straight edge will. However, like I said, it's a lot of mass, a lot of forward power to it. So generally this, I'd only sort of take this if I was doing heavier cutting. I'd want to be where I was chopping alder or something like that. Otherwise you just go with a lighter blade. I have done a number of modifications to this. Ground out this area right here to make an extended grip. That shifts the balance points back and makes it nicer to do finer work up here, or finer chopping, or finer carving. I checkered the handle and have done a lot of experimentation with the handle to try to figure out how to use it properly, and I talked about that in a previous video. One thing where this works really well is limbing, because again you can cut through most limbs in 1 or 2 hits, so it brings a lot of power. It's very nice for that. Cleaning up dead woods really well, breaks off all the small limbs, cuts through. One final modification I've been thinking about is putting a sharpened edge up here, maybe only about 1 inch, 2 inches at most, and leaving that at a relatively abrupt angle, say 20 degrees per side. And I'd use that then for really heavy branches, like really old, very crusty, knotty type wood, and I could break them off and that would save the primary edge. One thing that this is absolutely horrible at is trying to split wood. The blade profile is so thin that a couple of things will happen. It will wedge in the wood really easily, and the blade will start to twist and warp because again it just doesn't have the strength. So it's frustrating, it's not of any use for that. Basically, if you can split wood with this, the wood is so easy to split. it's not worth talking about anyway. But anything significant, it's just going to be an exercise in frustration. One of the nice things about having a blade like this is that you're not really concerned about how much wear or whatever you throw into it. I mean, if you use up one of these blades in a year, are you really going to be that concerned? So when I'm cutting through stock wood, or where I got a lot of dirty tasks to take care of, it's nice to have this machete around because I can take that out. So normally, for example, when I'm taking care of a lot of wood cutting at the lint, I'll separate out the really dirty wood, the wood that's got cement and concrete on it, and I cut through it with this. Yes, it dulls the edge. What difference does it make? It's very easy to sharpen this back up again. The grindability is very high, and you're not really concerned about losing a lot of metal off the edge of this, because again, the blade is so cheap, and would you really be bothered if you had to replace it? And even with the hardest of use, it's still going to last a few years anyway. So overall, with the modified grip, with the extended choil, with the reground primary, and like I said, with a small back swedge up there, I think this is going to be a really nice overall tool, although it doesn't have quite as wide a scope of work as some of my other blades. It will be very nice for heavy limbing, very nice for doing the heavier work on the dirtier woods, or the woods that got that many nails in it, broken off, rust is very difficult to chop through without hitting some of them. Nice to have for the heavier brush cutting, not as much grasses and light vegetation, bushes, but actually like alders, some woody vegetation, because this brings the power to it. And it's also nice for gardening, root type work. You got a nice flat spade tip up there that you can dig a little with, and again, you're not going to be that concerned about hitting the edge, dinging it up a bit on rocks. And along those lines too, one of the final modifications is I think I'll actually put a bit of a swedge or a sharpened edge up here as well, which will also give me a bit more digging ability, because I think that might come in useful to make it overall as a tool. But even this tip up here, without having the edge sharpened, is very nice for doing groundwork as well, because this tip goes into the ground, easily busts it up, pries it up just like a pick, and then this edge you can easily work it out just like a shovel. Now you're going to ding up the edge up here a bit when you do that, but again, this is a relatively inexpensive machete. Are you really going to be that concerned if that happens? Probably not. So nice for doing sod work and stuff like that. So overall, very decent tool, and I think the machete is aptly named. It's a heavy duty machete, and that's sort of what it fares with. But the only caveats that I would make on that, even though it's called a heavy duty machete, it's not something that works well on thicker woodwork. Like I said, if you can cut through it in a few chops, good. Over that, it's just going to stick and it's going to bind. And it's not something that you want to use for splitting, because the stock is too thin. But for heavier work, where the edge is going to take a bit of damage, you can use the spine. Again, these are very tough steels, so you can use the spine to break off stuff. You don't need to be that concerned about hammering on it with the spine, or on with the spine. These are very, very tough steels. And even those level of impacts will not actually chip the steel. All that did was impact down the spine a little bit. Again, these are very tough. These are spring steels, and they're spring hardened. So very nice, ultra durable, heavy blade.